Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon so that you never miss any video lesson from RAU'S IAS Study Circle.
Hello and welcome to the Daily News Simplified, an analysis of the newspaper from UPSC perspective. Today we will discuss the Delhi edition of the newspaper dated 18th July 2022, and the articles that we will discuss today are displayed on your screen. So let us start the discussion.
This article on page number 6 has been written in the context of the recent visit of the President of the United States of America to West Asia and especially his meeting with Saudi Arabia. Now, this is the first visit of Joe Biden to West Asia, and that is why it is seen as very, very important in shaping the geopolitics of West Asia. Now, as West Asia is one of the important regions for India because of its dependency on crude oil imports from this region, the geopolitics that is shaping up in West Asia also has certain direct as well as indirect impacts on India's foreign policy and its relations with these countries that are located in the West Asian region. And that is why in this context, we need to understand what exactly is happening in the geopolitics of West Asia, or what are the new contours of the geopolitics of West Asia. In this discussion, let us try and understand why is the President of the United States of America trying to reset the ties with Saudi Arabia. There are 2-3 factors in that, and we need to take them into account to understand the new contours of geopolitics in West Asia. In this line, Ukraine war is also one of the critical factors which is leading the President of the United States of America to change its policy towards Saudi Arabia. Now, in the DNS of 9th July, we have discussed in detail the geopolitics of West Asia, what exactly are the contours of the geopolitics in West Asia, which has certain religious undertones. In this discussion, we learned about the different poles that exist in the geopolitics of West Asia and the important rivalries that exist in the West Asian geopolitics. For example, the rivalry that is going on between Israel and the Arab countries and how a thaw is happening. Then there is rivalry between Israel and Iran, and also the Arab-Iran rivalry, and what has been the policy of United States of America. So we will start from the policy of United States of America. But before that, to understand this particular article, you should go through this DNS video to understand the background of the geopolitics of West Asia. In this line, if you look at the US and the West Asia's relations, the US has had good relations with Saudi Arabia ever since the oil was discovered in the Saudi Arabia in 1938. Further, the US has had good relations with Israel owing to its influential Jewish population. Then US also had good relations with the Shah of Iran before the Iranian Revolution in 1979. However, post-revolution, the policy of the United States of America has been to contain Iran, especially to stop its nuclear program. And also, since the Second World War, the US had considerable presence in this region in order to contain the erstwhile USSR during the Cold War period. However, now the US is pursuing a policy of bridging the issues between Arab and the Israel countries, and this was through the mediation of the United States of America, the Abraham Accords were signed. And this is leading to improvement in the relations between the Israel and the Arab countries, which is one of the rivalry that exists in the West Asian region. Now, this is being done in order to primarily contain the Iran and its nuclear program. In this backdrop, let us try and understand why is United States of America trying to reset its ties with Saudi Arabia. Now, this reset was required in the first place because there were certain issues that sprung up in the relations between US and the Saudi Arabia. In this line, one of the important incidents that happened in the West Asia was the killing of the Washington Post newspaper journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Now, he was killed inside the Saudi Arabian consulate in Turkey, in Istanbul, the capital of Turkey. Now, as the journalist Jamal Khashoggi was a US citizen, the killing became a big issue between the relations between US and Saudi Arabia. In this line, the new President of the United States of America, Joe Biden, had accused Saudi Arabia of killing Jamal Khashoggi. And that is why this was one of the strains that happened in the relations between US and the Saudi Arabia. Further, the US administration had also announced the ending of America's support for Saudi Arabia's war on Yemen. Now, Yemen is one country where the proxy war between the Saudi Arabia and Iran is clearly visible, where the Saudi Arabia is supporting the government of Yemen, while Iran is supporting the Houthi rebels. However, now the US administration has announced the ending of America's support for Saudi Arabia and its support to the government of Yemen and the existing civil war that exists there. So one of the primary issues that strained the relations between the US and Saudi Arabia was the killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. So despite the existence of such issues, why is the US now trying to reset its ties with Saudi Arabia? The first reason is the Abraham Accords that were signed during the Donald Trump administration. In this line, the Donald Trump administration had mediated an agreement between Israel and some of the Arab countries to normalize the ties in the West Asian region, where Israel and Arab countries have had rivalry since the Second World War. And that is why the Abraham Accords are a set of agreements that saw Israel and four Arab countries normalize their ties under the aegis of Trump administration, and this has brought structural changes in the geopolitical alignment of the West Asia. In this line, some of these Arab countries and Israel have taken steps to build a new political, economic, and security partnership seeking to counter Iran. In this, one of the initiatives that we see or often see in the news articles is I2U2. And this was possible, this is also called as the West Asian Quad, and this was possible only because of the normalization of ties between Arab countries and Israel because of the Abraham Accords. Now, I2U2 here stands for India-Israel, US and UAE agreement, which seeks to advance economic partnership in this region. And that is why, in order to further strengthen the Israel-Arab ties, the United States of America's relationship with the Saudi Arabia is very, very crucial in this region. And this also becomes crucial because it can be one of the fronts to counter the rising Iran, or you can say to counter and contain the Iran's nuclear program. In this line, the second factor that has prompted the US to reset its ties with Saudi Arabia is the Iran factor. And different presidents of the United States of America have followed different foreign policy towards Iran. In this line, the foreign policy that was followed by Barack Obama, he had advocated cold peace and he finalized the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the nuclear deal as it was called. In this line, the sanctions were removed from the Iran, and the Iran had to put its nuclear power plants under the vision or surveillance of the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA. However, one issue here was that the Barack Obama administration went ahead with this JCPOA without taking Israel into confidence, because Israel did not want this JCPOA to be finalized. In this line, the Donald Trump administration, who was the president after the Barack Obama of the United States of America, followed a policy which is known as the maximum pressure policy against Iran. And this was pursued in order to isolate Iran economically, also impose sanctions on Iran, and this was done in order to bring Iran to table so that it can stop its nuclear program. Further, the Iran factor is also becoming important because of the intrusion of China in the West Asia. In this line, Iran had entered into a 25-year economic cooperation agreement with China, and this is prompting the United States of America to reset its ties with Saudi Arabia, which were strained because of certain recent issues. In this line, when Joe Biden took over the presidency of the United States of America, he tried to revive the nuclear deal that was finalized under the Barack Obama administration. However, this revival attempt did not succeed. And this did not succeed primarily because of the reluctance of the Israel to accept this kind of a deal being finalized or implemented. In this line, one of the important issues that existed in the revival of the Iran nuclear deal was the US's designation of the army of the Iran as a terrorist organization. So Iran wanted that US should remove this tag of terrorist organization from the Iran's army. However, Israel and some of the politicians back home in the United States of America did not want this removal of tag of Iran's army as a terrorist organization. And that is why this has also emerged as one of the factors for US to reset its ties with Saudi Arabia. And last but not the least, the third important reason is the Ukraine war. In this line, ever since the Ukraine war started in February 2022, US along with the West European countries are imposing sanctions on Russia. Now, this imposition of sanction has disrupted the global energy markets, and it is turning the cost of living crisis in Western countries worse. In this line, the US has already banned the Russian oil, while the EU is phasing out 90% of the Russian oil imports and is planning to impose an insurance ban on the tankers that are carrying the Russian fuel. Now, this ban on insurance of the tankers will be crucial because majority of the Russian crude oil is being transported through the European vessels. In this line, the countries will not provide insurance to such vessels who are transporting the Russian crude oil. And if you look at the crude oil prices, because of the sanctions that have been imposed on Russia, because Russia is one of the important suppliers of crude oil in the world, the crude oil prices in the international market are already hovering around $100 a billion. And it is said that once this insurance ban kicks in, the prices of the crude oil in the international markets will further jump. Now, because of this rise in the crude oil prices, the inflation situation in the Western countries will further worsen. And if you look at the inflation in the United States of America presently, because of the rise in the crude oil prices, it is at a 41-year high of 9.1%. And that is why the United States of America wants Saudi Arabia to pump in more oil into the market so that the prices of the crude oil can be brought down. And that is why these are the three factors where the US wants to strengthen the Abraham Accords and strengthen the relationship between Israel and the Arab countries to put a common front to counter Iran and contain its nuclear program. And the second factor is, of course, to push Saudi Arabia to increase its supply of crude oil so that the international crude oil prices can be brought down, which has been one of the consequences of the sanctions that have been imposed by the United States of America on Russia post its attack on Ukraine. So these are few factors, and these are some of the important events that are happening in the geopolitics of West Asia, which can be important for us to understand what is happening there. And this is important because already in the last DNS video, we have discussed the impact the geopolitics of West Asia has on India's interest. With this, let's take up the next news article now. This article on page number 12 reads that only 50% of the farmers benefited from loan waivers, says a study. In this line, this study highlights that the implementation of the farm loan waivers has been poor in the states like Telangana, MP, Jharkhand, Punjab, Karnataka, and Uttar Pradesh. Now, every time an election happens in India, be it at the central level or at the state level, it always ignites the debate of efficacy of the farm loan waivers because inevitably the political parties announce farm loan waivers in order to woo the vote bank of the farmers. But the issue of farm loan waiver has been projected as bad economics. In this line, in 2016 and 17, India faced a cumulative loan waiver of rupees 3.1 lakh crore, which stands at about 2.6% of India's GDP. Now, this 2.6% of the GDP could have been used to pay for 16 times the rural roads budget or increase India's irrigation potential by 55%, which could have been beneficial in terms of improving the overall infrastructure in the rural areas, which could have boosted the farm incomes. In this context, let us try and understand what is meant by this term farm loan waivers, what is the rationale behind such farm loan waivers, and also what are the problems and what are the alternatives that exist. Let us look at all these issues in detail to understand this issue of farm loan waivers. In this line, first question that comes into our mind is what are farm loan waivers? Now, normally what happens is that farmers take loans from banks, they take loans from cooperative societies or cooperative banks, etc. And in normal circumstances, the liability of repaying such loan lies on the farmers. However, during election times or during the times of crisis, the central government and the state governments take over the liability of the farmers to repay the loans to the bank. And that is how the farmers are no more liable to pay these loans back to the banks. In this line, the central and the state governments support the farmers because they are vulnerable sections. Also, at times, they are at the receiving end of the fury of the climate change and weather related issues, which leads to destruction of the crops. And that is why the farm loan waivers are at times provided to support the farmers from getting into a debt crisis. However, this also is used as a tool by the political parties to woo the farmers in normal circumstances also. And that is where it becomes an issue. So what exactly is the rationale behind the farm loan waivers? The first rationale for providing the farm loan waivers is the agrarian distress. And this has been ongoing issue because of rising input costs in the agriculture, lower productivity in the agriculture, and lower prices of the farm produce like wheat, rice, etc. And that is why the farmers are not able to repay the debt through the loans that they have taken because of such issues that the agriculture sector is already facing structurally. Second is the farmers are highly indebted, and that is why they need the support of the state in order to stop them from being indebted further. The third important issue is the increase in the farmer suicides, and that is why the state at times comes to the support of the farmers. Now, in this line, when the farmers take the loans and they are unable to repay the loans because of crop failure, this becomes a kind of taboo, and that is what forces them to commit suicide. And that is where the support of the central government and the state government is required to support the farmers by waiving off the farm loans. Further, there has been increased intensity of the incidents like droughts and floods because of the climate change and global warming, and this has become one of the factors for reduced farm incomes. And finally, there is high volatility in the prices of agricultural commodities. So these are some of the factors which are taken into the consideration for providing the farmers with the farm loan waivers. However, there are certain problems that are associated with such farm loan waivers, and let us look at that also. Now, if you look at the farm loan waivers, they are a good initiative to provide immediate relief to the farmers who are facing crisis because of crop failure. However, such farm loan waivers do not address the structural problems of the agriculture, and that is why they are considered as band-aid solution for the current agricultural inefficiency. Rather, the focus of the government should be on investment in the agriculture, which could improve the efficiency of the agriculture produce, which should also focus on creating infrastructure in the rural areas, which could boost the agricultural incomes. Secondly, such farm loan waivers have been seen to not benefit the small and the marginal farmers, which should be the ones who should be supported through the farm loan waivers. And only 15% of the small and the marginal farmers have access to institutional credit or formal credit. Further, it affects the credit culture in the economy because even those farmers who have the capacity to repay back the loans would default on the anticipation of loan waivers. Because at times, the big farmers who have the capacity to repay their loans do not do so. And this is because they expect that whenever the elections are coming, the political parties might announce the farm loan waivers and they try to utilize this sentiment of being a vote bank. Further, it leads to moral hazard as people would borrow loans for wasteful expenses in anticipation of farm loan waivers. Further, it encourages fragmentation in the land holding. This is because large farmers could divide their land holdings amongst the family members in order to become eligible for any future loan waiver scheme. Also, it does not lead to or it has not led to reduction in the farmers' suicide because the governments have been providing the farm loan waivers in the past, but according to the National Crime Records Bureau data, there has been no decrease in the farmers' suicide even in those states where the loan waivers have been announced in the past. Further, such kind of loan waivers put the banks into poor financial position. This is because it could lead to increase in the non-performing assets due to poor credit culture, and it also delays in loan repayment by the government. Further, there is decrease in the capital investment in the agriculture because this is leading to cross subsidization, where the government, rather than focusing on investment in agriculture, is focusing on farm loan waivers because this is politically beneficial to the parties in power. And that is why, in anticipation of future losses due to loan waivers, the banks would channelize lesser amount of credit to the agriculture. And rather than solving the present agrarian distress, the loan waivers could actually aggravate the problem in the future. Also, it impacts the finances because the loan waivers in 2019 accounted for about 2% of India's GDP, which led to higher fiscal deficit and debt burden on the government. Also, it has adverse impact on the economy because higher fiscal deficit and debt burden reduces the ability of the government to undertake capital expenditure and can lead to slowdown or recession. Now, as we have seen some of the drawbacks or the problems with the farm loan waiver schemes, let us look at what are certain alternatives that are available. In this line, it has been highlighted by various committees that there should be enhanced public investment. And this investment should be done to address the structural problems such as irrigation canals, rainwater harvesting projects, marketing infrastructure, cold storage chain, etc. And these investments will have multiplier effect on the farmer's income and would enable the government to realize its vision of doubling the farmer's income by 2022. Further, there should be foolproof insurance mechanism by plugging the loopholes in the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana, because this can act as a proof against any kind of crop failure because of the furies of the weather. And finally, there should be focus on enhancing the cash support schemes like the PM Kisan Yojana. So these are the various issues associated with farm loan waivers, and you can use all of these points to write answers in the GS paper 3 in the economy section regarding the analysis of the farm loan waivers and the economy associated with them. With this, let's take up the next news article now. This article on page number 8 reads that why is Kerala protesting the Supreme Court's eco-sensitive zone notification? So let us try and understand what is the ruling of the Supreme Court regarding the eco-sensitive zones and why is there protest in Kerala. Now these eco-sensitive zones have come into the news because of the protests by various farmers in the state of Kerala. And they are protesting against one of the orders of the Supreme Court which had ordered the establishment of 1 kilometer eco-sensitive zones around all protected areas, wildlife sanctuaries, and national parks. In this context, we should be aware what exactly are these eco-sensitive zones, what is the Supreme Court ruling, and how are the activities in the eco-sensitive zones identified, which is a cause of protest by the farmers in Kerala. And then we will look at what is the significance of delineating eco-sensitive zones as well as what are their challenges. So all the points that we discuss here can be important for us from both prelims examination perspective related to eco-sensitive zones, while the points in the analytical part can be important for us from the environment and ecology in the general studies paper 3. Let us look at various aspects of this particular issue. So we'll be understanding this particular article in a question answer format. That is, what is an eco-sensitive zone, which has been highlighted in this article. So these eco-sensitive zones are notified by the central government through the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change under the provisions of Environment Protection Act 1986. So this can become an important point for us from the prelims examination perspective. However, you should note that the term eco-sensitive zone has not been mentioned in the Environmental Protection Act. So this is an important fact that although the eco-sensitive zones are notified under the Environmental Protection Act 1986, the word eco-sensitive zone has not been mentioned in the Act directly. Second is that according to the National Wildlife Action Plan 2002 to 2016, which has been issued by the same ministry, the land within 10 kilometers of the boundaries of national parks and wildlife sanctuaries is to be notified as eco-fragile zones or eco-sensitive zones. And areas beyond 10 kilometers can also be identified by the Union Government as ESZ if they hold larger ecologically important sensitive corridors. So basically they are notified by the central government and they can notify any particular area. And if the central government wants to extend the eco-sensitive zones beyond this limit of 10 kilometers, they can do easily. So this brings us to what is the purpose of declaring an eco-sensitive zone. So according to the ministry, the purpose of declaring an eco-sensitive zone around national park and sanctuaries is to create some kind of shock absorbers for the protected areas. And they would also act as a transition zone from area of high protection in areas involving less protection. So this brings us to what is this Supreme Court ruling. However, the first question that should come into our mind is that why was this ruling required? So we are aware that the central government has issued this notification of creating 10-kilometer buffer zone, which should be known as the eco-sensitive zones. However, successive state governments have failed to execute this. Further, the Supreme Court has also issued many deadlines to declare the ecologically sensitive zones since 2006, and also the central government has come out with guidelines. But the state governments have repeatedly failed to execute these guidelines and declaration of ecologically sensitive zones. In this line, the Supreme Court has provided this ruling. So what are the key features of this ruling? First is that the Supreme Court has directed that each protected forest should have an eco-sensitive zone of at least 1 kilometer. And in this eco-sensitive zone, no permanent structure will be allowed. Further, mining within the wildlife sanctuaries and national parks cannot be permitted. Further, it highlights that if there is any existing ecologically sensitive zone which goes beyond 1 kilometer buffer zone, or if any statutory instrument prescribes a higher limit, then such extended boundary shall prevail, which means that there should be minimum 1 kilometer of ecologically sensitive zone or buffer zone around the protected areas. If the protected buffer zone extends beyond this 1 kilometer zone, then that will be the criteria that will be accepted, and it can be extended beyond 1 kilometer. There is no limit on extension. However, the ecologically sensitive zone cannot be reduced below 1 kilometer limit. In this line, the farmers are protesting because there is high density of human population near the notified protected areas. And as such, they have been demanding that all the human settlements be exempt from the ESZ ruling. So this brings us to what kind of activities are allowed in the ecologically sensitive zone. So if you look at the kind of activities, some are allowed, others are regulated, and some are clearly prohibited. So let us look at these. So if you look at the allowed activities within the buffer zones or the ecologically sensitive zones, it can include ongoing agriculture, horticultural practices by local communities, rainwater harvesting, organic farming, renewable energy source adoption of green technology for all activities, etc. As far as regulated activities are concerned, it can include felling of tree, establishment of hotels and resorts, drastic change of agriculture system, but these activities will have to be regulated, and there is a long list of activities which are regulated. And as far as prohibition is concerned,
The activities which are prohibited include commercial mining, commercial use of firewood, establishment of major hydroelectricity projects, production of any hazardous substance, and undertaking activities that are related to tourism like overflying the national park area by an aircraft, hot air balloon, discharge of affluent and solid waste in the national water body or terrestrial area. So these are the activities that are clearly prohibited, these are regulated, and the others are allowed in the ecologically sensitive zones, which extend beyond the boundaries of the protected areas like national parks and wildlife sanctuaries. So, as we have seen certain features of the ecologically sensitive zones, let us look at the significance of these ecologically sensitive zones. So, as we are aware that these are transition or buffer zones, and that is why they help in mitigating the adverse impact of developmental activities in the periphery of the national parks and the wildlife sanctuaries. They further regulate the exploitation of resources and minimizes the deforestation. Also, they help in minimizing man-animal conflict, and also they help in effective in situ conservation of biodiversity. However, there are certain challenges as far as the ecologically sensitive zones are concerned. First challenge is the development versus conservation debate, because the peripheries of the national park and wildlife sanctuaries have human settlements, and these areas are also important for commercial activities, and that is why the balancing of developmental activities with that of conservation has been a cause of concern. Further, the buffer zones are not pure buffer zones because already several activities of locals are being affected due to existing regulations of conservation sites. And local communities have struggled to get compensation against loss of crops by wild animals under the present regulations. And at the same time, there has been administrative apathy in recognizing and executing the Forest Right Act effectively because it has been used as a regulating provision rather than facilitating the community rights. So these are certain challenges also in the implementation of the ecologically sensitive zones. After going through this discussion, you can practice this question from the mains examination perspective. That is, what are eco-sensitive zones? Which activities are allowed, regulated, and prohibited in these zones? Highlight the challenges in the implementation of these ESZ guidelines in the context of the recent Supreme Court ruling. With this, let's take up the next news article now. This article on page number 1 is related to the election of President of India. And today is the day when the voting is happening for the election of the new President for India. In this line, the process of election of the President of India becomes important for us from prelims examination perspective as well as mains examination perspective. And we should be aware of the important constitutional provisions related to the procedure and process of election of the President of India. Now, this issue has been discussed in detail in a previous DNS video. So let us revise from that video the basics of the election procedure of the President of India.
This topic is in relation to the presidential election, the manner, as well as the constitutional provisions which govern the presidential election in our constitution. This topic has come in the context that because the tenure of the present president, Mr. Ramnath Kovind, is about to over, and that is why new candidate will be selected. So in this backdrop, let us now go through the important constitutional provisions which govern the presidential election in India. First of all, we should know that who elects the president. The president in India is not directly elected by the people, but indirectly elected. Now, what do we mean by indirect election? Indirect election is that it is not the normal citizens of India which go. You and I do not participate in the presidential election directly. However, the people whom we have already elected in our states or at the central level, they in turn elect the president. So that is why it is an indirect election. President is elected by the people who are elected by us. So that is why Article 54 of the Indian Constitution says that the Electoral College is to be constituted to elect the president. And the composition of this Electoral College is elected members of both the houses of parliament. Now this is to be remembered, this is very important. Members of both the houses of parliament, that is Rajya Sabha as well as Lok Sabha, take part in it. But not all the members of the houses of parliament take part. Only those members who are elected take part in these houses. That means nominated members do not participate in presidential election. Similarly, the elected members of the legislative assemblies of all the states and also of Delhi as well as Puducherry. So I am again repeating it. The composition of the Electoral College consists of the elected members of both the Houses of Parliament, elected members of all the state assemblies, as well as members of Delhi and Puducherry. Now comes the tenure of the President. So this is mentioned in Article 56 of our Constitution. Article 56 says that the President shall hold office for a term of 5 years. So this means the tenure of a President is 5 years from the date on which he enters upon his office. However, there is one very important condition attached to this tenure. It says that notwithstanding anything, President continues to hold the office until his successor enters upon his office. That means, for example, because of certain reason, let's assume that the 5 years have passed of the present president, but the election for the next president has not taken place, or next president is not yet elected and he is not yet to enter upon his office. So until and unless the successor enters upon his office, the present president will continue to hold his office. It may be beyond 5 years also. However, generally the election of the next president takes place before the tenure gets over of the present president. It is mentioned in the Act. According to the Presidential and Vice Presidential Elections Act 1952, the notification calling to the election of the office of the President can be issued by the Election Commission on any day within the period of 60 days before the expiry of the term of the office of the outgoing President. That means that if the tenure of the present President is about to get over by 30th July, then within 60 months preceding this 30th July, that is 30th May to 30th July, Election Commission can conduct the election of the President. Article 324 of the Indian Constitution tells about the authority which can conduct the election to the office of President as well as Vice President. And as per this article, the authority to conduct the elections to the office of President is vested in the Election Commission of India. Moreover, the election which we are talking about of the President takes place with the system of proportional representation by means of single transferable vote as well as secret ballot. Now let us come to the eligibility criteria of the President. Article 58 mentions the eligibility conditions to contest the election to the office of President. There are 4 conditions. First, he must be a citizen of India. Second, he must have completed 35 years of age. Third, he must be eligible to be a member of Lok Sabha. Now this is very important because in questions this word generally gets replaced by Rajya Sabha. So you need to remember that he must be eligible to be the member of Lok Sabha. And the fourth, he should not be holding any office of profit under the government of India or the government of any state. Now, office of profit is not defined by the Indian Constitution. However, the Constitution again says that the offices of the President, Vice President, Governor, Minister of the Union or any state will not be considered as office of profit, and the person who is presently at any of these posts is eligible to contest the elections. So I hope the eligibility criteria for the election of the President is clear to all of you. Now we'll move towards the manner of the election of President and the value of votes. First of all, we must understand that whenever general election takes place, one person has one vote. For example, if you vote, you will have one value. If I'll vote, I'll have one value. So one person has one vote. But same is not the case during the presidential elections. Because we have already discussed that in presidential elections, common people do not participate. Rather, they are the MLAs or the MPs who participate. So the vote given to every MLA or MP differ. And there is a specific formula to calculate the vote of one MLA as well as MP. For example, the value of one MLA is calculated as per this formula, that is, the total population of that very state of which the MLA belongs. It used to be divided by the total number of MLAs. So now, because the population of each state vary, that is why the value of MLAs of different states will also vary. That is very obvious. Now come to the value of the vote of MPs. The formula is total number of votes which are assigned to MLAs divided by total number of MPs. Now when MPs are to be considered, the value of the votes of MPs are to be considered, it remains same of Rajya Sabha MP as well as Lok Sabha MP. The reason being, the total number of votes assigned to the MLAs will remain same, as well as the total number of MPs including the Rajya Sabha as well as Lok Sabha will remain same. So here the numerator and denominator are both same, and that is why the value of the MPs are same, but the value of the votes of MLAs differ because the population of every state differs. In this context, 84th Constitutional Amendment Act 2001 is very significant because it provided that until the relevant population figures for the census after the year 2026 is published, the population of the states for the purpose of the calculation of the value of the votes of presidential election shall mean the population as ascertained at the 1971 census. This means that in the numerator which we are talking, that total populations of the state, so the population of the state will not be considered as the present level of populations. It is to be considered the population levels as per 1971 census until and unless new census after the year of 2026 is published. Now come to the nomination stage. Before election, there is a nomination, and the candidates who intend to stand in the election is to be nominated. And that nomination has to be signed with the list of 50 proposers as well as 50 seconders. And these proposers and seconders can be anyone from the total of 4,896 members of the Electoral College. That is the total number of MPs and MLAs in India. And once the election is done, here first past the post system is not followed. For securing the victory, an important rule exists. The Election Commission totals up all the valid votes cast by the Electoral College through the paper ballots, and to win, the candidates must secure 50% of the total votes plus 1. So that means it is not just who has secured the maximum votes, whether it is 10% or it is 90%, he will be elected as a president. No. The winning candidate must secure 50% of the total votes casted plus 1. So this was all about the election of the president as well as the constitutional provisions. I hope you have understood all these provisions in a very good manner, and you will be able to produce and attempt correct answers in your real examination.
With this, we conclude today's discussion. Now let's take up the question for the day.